All right, so let's talk about loss runs. Loss runs are a part of your full submission. And if loss runs are completely new to you, loss runs are basically a report that you get from the workers' comp carriers that show whether or not your client had any claims. If they did have claims, it gives very detailed information about the claims that occurred. This is all very important to your underwriter to see what kind of claims they've had in the past. It doesn't mean that they won't write the account if they have some, so don't worry about that. It's very common for businesses to have some sort of claims at one point or another throughout their time, being in business and having employees. So it's not very uncommon. Now, loss runs, each carrier has a different format, so it's very rare that you'll find carriers that have the same format of loss runs, but it's important to know that all of the data on the reports is the same. So another thing it's important to know is that if you have a client that you're working with who's been with a different workers' comp carrier each year for, let's say, for the last 5 years, they've bounced around and they've gone with a new carrier each year, as the agent submitting the account to underwriting, you do need to go to each of those carriers to request new loss runs. So you'll get very familiar with that process of requesting loss runs. So the data that's included on the loss runs report is going to have the valuation date. So that's the date that the report was generated. And it's important that that valuation date is always within 90 days because an employee could have an injury. And then when they go to the doctor, that injury could be tied to a policy. Maybe they have a backache and they never went to the doctor. Then when they finally go, it's determined by the doctor that that back problem was caused from a job that they had 1 year ago or 2 years ago. They could tie it back to an old policy. And for that reason, it's always going to be required that your loss runs are within 90 days old. So every year that you're quoting a client, you're going to have to go back to the same carriers to get the loss runs. Now, as part of the complete or the full submission, 3 to 4 years is standard in loss runs history. Some carriers require 4, some only require 3. They're all different. So you may want to just get the 3 to play it safe. And then if you have a carrier who comes back for a 4th year, you can go back and get those. But if you're starting with 3, you'll be good. For the most part, that's going to be the minimum that's required. So all of the loss runs are going to include the valuation date. They're going to include the number of claims that your client has had, each policy term. So each year could look different. It'll show the total paid on each claim, the total reserves, which is the amount saved to close out a claim but hasn't been paid yet. So the carriers make an estimate on what they think it's going to cost, and they pull that amount into reserves. The total incurred, which is the total of paid claims and the reserves combined, and they also show the total premium the client paid that year. So how to request loss runs. Each carrier, they make it pretty easy, to be honest with you, because it's so common and this information is required. So the carriers usually have a portal or a website where you can go in and download them directly, or they have a generic email inbox that you can send an email request to. No loss letters, NLLs, or also called NKLL for no known loss letters, can be used sometimes in place of loss runs in certain cases. So one example would be if your client has a gap in coverage, if there's some reason why they didn't have coverage for, a short period of time, a carrier may ask you to get a no loss letter signed by your client just to state that they didn't have any claims at that time that they're aware of. Sometimes if your client is new to workers' comp coverage and they've never had it before, a carrier might ask for a no loss letter. Or if they're binding retroactively, maybe you're quoting on October 5th and your client was supposed to be effective on October 1st. but they have coverage today. You're just still shopping for them to see if you can get something cheaper. A client might, or I'm sorry, a carrier might ask you for a no loss letter since they're going to backdate the policy a few days for your client. So we'll go over some sample loss runs and also a no loss letter. Also, the Accord 37 is the Accord version of a no loss letter. So we'll take a look at one of those. And I did want to mention regarding requesting loss runs can only be requested by either the client themselves, so the business owner, or the current broker on record. So if you're an agent that's coming in to quote a business and they've already got coverage today with through another broker, you will not be able to request those loss runs directly. So you're going to need to have your client help you get those. A simple email draft. I know in the past, me personally, I've drafted the entire email and just sent it to my client and said, forward this to this email address. And that way got the loss runs that way. So of course, as agents, we're always trying to make it as easy as possible on our clients. So that's just a recommendation, but it is important for you to know that if you're not the current agent on record, that you're not going to be able to contact that carrier to request those loss runs directly. You are going to need their help. So let's take a look at some actual loss runs and a no loss letter.